Hello, you're watching Oathbound Secrets with Annika, and I was watching a video the other day by Tara Mooknee. The only videos written and produced by a cow. You'll know that little line if you watch her videos. And she made this video about witches. She doesn't usually talk about witches and witchcraft, but this one video she made was so good because she went so in depth with the whole meaning of witchcraft and what a witch is, like historically, politically. And I thought that was such an interesting video that I hope everyone watches, and really drives it home for me, like the political atmosphere around the witch hunts. Now you got to think of this time in history in England and across a lot of Europe. It was really such like a peak moment. Is peak the right word? It's such a moment in history that was a real turning point, a real like revolutionary time period. I'm talking about the 16th and 17th centuries, and the reason for this is because we were experiencing a transition from one economic system to another, and that was the transition from feudalism to capitalism. And it's when you look at this era that you understand what the word capitalism actually means. A lot of people think that capitalism just means making money, like doing a business, making money, having your own business, or being part of a business. I don't know what people think it means, but it's something to do with like making money, and they think that capitalism is money and trade and markets, and money and trade and markets have existed for much longer than capitalism has existed. Okay, so money is not capitalism, markets are not capitalism, trade is not capitalism. Capitalism is something a lot more difficult to describe. But if you look at feudalism, okay, all right, that's another thing that's difficult to describe. How the hell do we describe what feudalism is? But this is why this period of history really fascinates me so much, because there's so much we can learn from those couple of centuries. So what happened at that time was huge, was crazy, and the politics of it really, it shaped our understanding of politics today in terms of left and right. What people call left and right comes from that era, because really, like the concept, whoever coined this sort of phrase of left and right in politics comes from the French Revolution, but while the France had a revolution, England also had a revolution, and England, actually, we had our revolution first. Go us. And we were the first country in Europe to have a revolution and behead our king. Yes, we dissolved the monarchy. Believe it or not. You wouldn't know it now, would you? I don't think anybody likes teaching this part of history. It's like something that's so glossed over, this brief moment in history when we abolished the monarchy. And that was what this whole left and right thing was originally about. It was about whether or not you wanted a monarchy or a parliament of like democracy, or the parliamentarian type of democracy. So in that framework, the right wing was the old traditional feudal system of let's have a king and the church and like a peasant based agricultural economy. That was the right wing at that time. And then the left wing was this new development, like these new radical crazy people who had a totally different understanding of Christianity, of religion in general, and who wanted a parliament and to not have a royal family in charge, and basically to liberate people from feudalism and adopt capitalism. So that was, at that time, that was considered the left wing. The left wing was the capitalists. And Marx and Engels, good old Marx and Engels, when they were analysing this period of history, when they were writing about it, they were saying how this was what they call like a bourgeois revolution, because the revolution was being propelled by capitalists or the bourgeoisie, which means that, okay, I will briefly describe, my attempt to describe what a capitalist is versus a feudal lord. Okay, in feudalism, I will try so hard to describe this accurately. Somebody's going to come after me in the comments and say that I didn't do a good job. But in feudalism, the lord of the manor, the guy who owns the land, also in some way owns the people who live there. So it was something like very close to slavery. In the sense that as a peasant, where you were born was where you have to work, and you're born on that land, and you know, if you try and run away, become a vagabond, an outlaw, that's like, imagine like Robin Hood and his merry men. That was a story all about outlaws who had escaped from like the feudal manor and just living like wild in the woods, like, ooh, scary bad guys. But you know, they're the what's the word, anti-hero, what's it called when like the hero of the story is like a type of villain but like in a good way. Anyway, you know the story of Robin Hood. So the idea back then was, as a peasant, you live on this manor, this is that what it's called? A manorial ground, or like a land that basically belongs to the landlord. That's like the origin of the word landlord. It's like literally the lord of the land, and you have to work for him, and in return for your work you get the protection of living within his domain, like where he's basically going to protect you from outsiders who are going to try and rob you or whatever. Supposedly, I don't know. Supposedly that's the benefits of living on the manor. But if you try and run away, like he'll just like send people to hunt you down, because you're like legally have to work for him, and not working for him is a crime. I think that's my best way of describing what it was. So basically, like, everybody on this land has like their own little cottage to live in. Like, usually, like, quite a lot of people would live in one little cottage. They didn't have like, it wasn't so idyllic. It was like quite very basic and basically living in poverty. But while you lived in this little cottage, there was something called common land, which was the land that you, as a commoner, as a peasant, are allowed to use for growing crops and keeping animals and all the stuff for your own existence, for your own food, basically. So the common land was communally like used, like, by everyone who lived there, in that area. So it was like shared. There was no like concept of like individual ownership of like little plots of land, although they would divide up a common plot into like little strips and say like, this is my bit and that's your bit, share it out, kind of thing, between them. Does that make sense? But it all belongs, it doesn't belong to them, it belongs to the landlord. Like, everything belongs to the landlord. It's his land, but you are afforded the opportunity to use that land to, you know, do whatever you want, grow your own food and raise your animals and live in, you know, some level of, I don't know, of survival. And all you had to do in return was grow food and raise animals for the landlord, so that, you know, he would be well fed and everything, but he doesn't have to work himself. Like, he doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't have to lift a finger because he's the landlord. And that's how landlordism works. It means other people work for you and they give you the goods that they've produced, and you get to enjoy those goods. And that's, I feel like that's a fairly good summary of feudalism. I'm sorry, I've probably left so much important information out. But the difference between feudalism and capitalism is that under capitalism, like, it was supposed to be like liberating people, like, oh, now you have freedom, now you can like move out of this land, this manor, and you can go and live in the city and get a job in a factory, and isn't that great? You know, that was the idea at the time. And it was a huge upheaval of people's way of life. Like, everything that they were used to was quite sort of suddenly shifting, and I think it was a very scary time for a lot of people, the amount of uncertainty, because on one hand there was like religious uncertainty, because the dissolution of the monasteries by Henry VIII was the creation of the Church of England, which was the breaking away from Catholicism. That firstly was scary for people, obviously, because for so many years, I don't know how many hundreds of years, they'd been told that Catholicism is correct and that's, you know, accepted, and that is how people believe, and that is the official doctrine. And then suddenly the Church of England broke away from that and said, no, actually, we're going to do our own thing. And suddenly Catholics are criminals, and a lot of things to do with Catholicism are now banned. And this kind of like snowballed into what is called Puritanism. And the Puritans just saw Catholicism as like completely corrupt and evil and bad, and they wanted to get as far away from that as possible and get to what they saw as a pure version of Christianity based on the Bible and their idea. This was the time when literacy was increasing, so more and more people were reading the Bible for the first time and being able to interpret those words for themselves. And then, like, that was just a huge mindfuck for a lot of people that had never read the Bible before but had been Catholic that whole time, because suddenly they're reading like all these. I mean, if you've ever read the Bible, you know what a mindfuck is, because it's just full of contradictions. It's very confusing and it doesn't really make sense. So they're trying to figure it out, and they're like losing their minds thinking, how are we going to follow the Bible correctly and save ourselves from damnation? And that's when they got all this fear about witches and the idea of like the devil being out there turning people against them and cursing them and working against them and yeah, it was just like a kind of paranoia and fear about performing religion correctly at this time. So like when we talk about witches, like I'm always thinking back to this specific time in history and the climate of fear surrounding particularly women, because obviously women were the main target of the witch hunts. Why was that? Why had women become such a target? And what were the like economic reasons? Because in my mind there's always an economic reason for why things are happening in a certain way. Like I always just link everything to economy, and I'm thinking the reason, you know, there's something to do with money, there's something to do with survival, there's something to do with getting enough food to eat and live, there's something, you know, very intrinsic, it's literally life or death situation that has created this huge fear and violence. Like this was an incredibly violent time because we're talking about civil unrest. There was literally a civil war in England in 16 something, I can't remember what year it was, 1630 or something like that, which was like actually nearing towards the end of witch hunting. Actually, what year was the peak of witch hunting in England? I can't remember. Okay, maybe it wasn't nearing towards the end quite yet. Like I'm thinking it's quite a long period of history, and I'm thinking actually the end of the 17th century was pretty much when it was over. So all right, so we're still hunting witches during the Civil War. What a time to be alive, can you imagine? And the parliamentarians happen to be Puritans, so they were also because they were so puritanical. I don't know if you've heard of this guy called Oliver Cromwell. He was this Puritan radical revolutionary guy who banned Christmas. Oh my god, he banned Christmas. And this temporary abolition of the monarchy and the banning of Christmas and making like Puritan religion the official religion, it didn't last too long. It only lasted like, I can't remember actually, 2 or 3 years or something. It was very brief before the royalists managed to get back in power, because they put the son of King Charles, who had been beheaded. King Charles's son was also called Charles, and they made him the king, and they were like, there we go, back to monarchy again, back to Church of England again, and back to having Christmas again. So even though that had happened, I'd say like it wasn't exactly like back to normal completely, because there was already this huge transition into capitalism, into the capitalist economy that had happened during this time of upheaval. And I feel like this period of history, this huge upheaval, this huge transition, this huge transfer of wealth, let's get this straight, like this is such an important aspect, the transfer of wealth, because suddenly the old feudal system is collapsing, and the people with the money and power are now the capitalists, who are for the most part factory owners. Like that was like kind of the basis of capitalism, was this whole concept of manufacturing mass produced items in factories, rather than having an economy based on like cottage workshops of like little handmade artisan items. Like that's how it used to be. It used to be very like the little peasants in their little cottage would be like knitting or whatever, and like everything was like very homemade and handcrafted and beautiful. I don't want to like romanticize it too much, but it was also at this time that the what are they called? Oh shit, I forgot the word for it. What's the word for the guys that were sabotaging the factories? Luddites, that's the one. A lot of people hear the word Luddite and they misconstrue what this actually means. Like, people think that a Luddite is somebody who's anti-technology, because Luddites were sabotaging factories. But the reason they were sabotaging factories wasn't because they were inherently anti-technology. What they were against was the exploitation of workers in those factories, because the factories were employing women and children in very dangerous conditions on very low pay. And you can imagine, like, if you're transitioning from what was like a nice sort of like artisan based, homemade, lovingly crafted items that are built, you know when you're making something and you're building it to last, versus like this cheap mass produced rubbish that is just, it's not made to last, it's made to buy and then throw away and then buy another one and throw it away and buy another one. Like, that's capitalism. That's what capitalism is all about. It's like this mass production and wage labor. So instead of having peasants who are bound to work for you because they live on your land, now the peasants don't live on your land anymore, because they're not peasants anymore. They're wage workers under a capitalist system. So they don't have anywhere to live. Actually, they become like tenants. They're still tenants of a landlord, but now, instead of living in a little cottage on a manor and in this like very rural setting, they're now renting a room in a very crowded city next to a factory, and they're paying for that with their wages that they've earned from working in that factory. And that is what capitalism means. It means that you are selling your hours for an hourly wage, so you get that hourly wage from the factory owner or the business owner, and the owner of the factory or whatever type of business it is making a profit from your work. They're not having to do anything other than set up the business, set up the factory. Yeah, okay, they've invested some money into creating that, but where did they get that money from in the first place? Probably from being some kind of lord or knight or what's the word? What's the word for somebody who's like high up in society? God, my brain. What is that word? You know the word that I'm trying to say. The word for people that are really high up in society. Anyway, from that old feudal system of the people that had money will always be the people who have money, and a lot of it was from slavery, of course, as well. Shit, I didn't even touch on slavery. Shit, man, that's a whole because obviously during this time, like, oh my gosh, the whole transatlantic slave trade was going on, and the whole colonization of the rest of the world was going on. What a crazy time in history. Like, do you understand how fascinating this time in history is, and why I'm just like obsessed with trying to learn everything about it? Because I feel like it informs so much of what is happening now, today, in this, the current world that we're in. We are currently experiencing a dramatic shift from one type of economy into a different type of economy, and I don't know what the word for this new kind of capitalism, some people call it like just late stage capitalism, and some people call it neo-feudalism. So it's kind of like, it feels like it's a step backwards in a lot of ways. But I'm not sure if neo-feudalism really makes sense as a term, or if we're better off just saying, yeah, it's capitalism, but it's a different type of capitalism. It's a new stage of capitalism. It's some people will say the final stage of capitalism before it implodes in on itself, because capitalism is just like a system of infinite growth. The whole like idea that you can just keep going and going without the bubble ever bursting, which is just madness, because at some point, that it's just the bubble will burst. Capitalism is not sustainable as a system. You can't keep consuming, you can't keep consuming and wasting and consuming and wasting, there's not enough physical resources in the world to keep doing that before you destroy the planet. It's like a cancer. It's just so destructive. So this is why when you talk about witchcraft, you're talking about something that is very political, because the way that a witch was turned into a scapegoat, the way that women were turned into scapegoats as witches, was part of this turmoil in society, as women's work was changing, and the view of women's role in society was changing. So when we call ourselves witches and we reclaim the word witch, we're really highlighting this period of a history and saying, what happened then was really fucked up. It was really, really fucked up. And those women that were targeted, majority women that were targeted by people who were Christian, radical Christian, what's the word for it, fundamentalists, who wanted to impose, their strict version of how a woman should behave and what a good Christian woman is. And if you fall out of line, you will be accused of being a witch, and you will be tortured, and you will be murdered in the most gruesome way. And this is echoing a kind of evangelical Christian movement that is happening right now, Christian nationalism. The Christian nationalism that is just growing and growing right now across the world is almost a mirror of that same kind of puritanical movement that happened back then that caused the witch hunts. This is why, if you are a witch or you call yourself a witch, you should be political minded. And when I say political, I don't mean talking about red and blue, which one do you want to vote for, red or blue? That's not what politics is. That's a bullshit version of politics, okay? Real politics is looking at the economic system that we're living in and who is benefiting and who is being exploited. That's what real politics is. And the way that religion comes into play, and the way that our freedoms are fought for and won, how our liberation is won. That's what politics is, really. So, yeah, that's about half an hour's worth of me just info dumping on you. So I hope you enjoyed that, and leave a comment in the comment section below if you enjoyed this rambling, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.